Good afternoon, Aristo.
Good morning, Ron. It's good to see you again.
Thank you. We got cut off, but I'm glad that it cut off when it did rather than much earlier in the video that we made on Friday.
Yes.
You didn't get to do your conclusion, but you did get all the points in that you needed to cover, so I thought that was good.
99.9% of them. In fact, I'm going to start today with a few comments that some people made. Thank you for your comments on the YouTube channel. It appears that this topic was well received, and I'm glad for that, because you never know. I'm just, this is unrehearsed. I do a little bit of research on it just to make sure I'm not off on the points and stuff. But there's no script and there's no memorization of the material or anything. This is basically my own experience of the thing, and that's where the script is. It's my own sense of being. One person, of course, said that I'm full of myself, that I'm not giving you a chance to talk. And I wanted to address that because, look, this is a very extensive and deep topic. As we know, we've gone over yesterday, and I want to put as much material possible, as clearly as possible, and as simply put as possible within the time frame. And it's not all that easy. So there's a certain continuity of thought, and I don't want to lose that train of continuity. There's a certain flow of awareness, where there's competence. So forgive me, but this is a little bit of a kind of lecture instead of a discussion or an interview. Not that it's lecturing. And yes, I am full of myself because that is how I reference the understanding. I can't be full of somebody else, and I can't be full of nothing, because then I'd have nothing to say. That's the whole point of what we were talking about with the ego. It is not bad or wrong to be full of yourself. In fact, that's the whole point of wholeness. So I'd like to set aside this whole sense of the fairness of, let's say, 50% for Aristo and 50% for Ron in the conversation and all of these things. Something is being conveyed here. And I'm also conveying this once a week and not every day because it's not easy material to digest. Even if it's presented clearly and concisely and simply, it is something basically that is the responsibility of the listener to absorb and to contemplate and to figure out how these principles can fit into their lives. This is why I said the other day that, well, this is for people who already resonate with this material on some level but don't put it into words or quite these words or are confused by other versions or somehow, would benefit from a verbal structuring of the understanding. And in this way, the person thus benefiting can then refer back to their own sense, their own intuition, their own understanding, and be able to apply it. Knowledge is not data. Knowledge is contact. The original ancient version of knowledge was carnal knowledge, or basically the sense of knowledge was having a contact or connection with something, sensing it, being able to perceive it. Experience, exactly, including sensate experience. Understanding is putting that experience into perspective and relating it to your own other experiences, to putting it into context, to giving it a sense of continuity with your own being. Wisdom is applying understanding into your life. All I can do is provide a certain experience of the structuring of my understanding of how it relates to my experience in my life, and this can catalyze with somebody's existing understanding and thus lead to wisdom. Nobody can give you wisdom. That basically is something that we need to get through our heads and hearts and bodies, because then we are open to a natural ability, an instinct of absorbing wisdom for ourselves. I mean, the ancient word for wisdom, the Hebrew word for wisdom is chokmah, which basically means skill. It's in the sense of having a skill, being able to apply. The other thing I wanted to mention was that sometimes my analogies are not accurate. I'm not a know-it-all, even though because I speak in this continuity form, I had been misunderstood. as being full of myself, the other person said. But one person mentioned about the analogy of birds. She said, I have raised a lot
Actually,
of...
two people brought that up. Another one brought it up. I saw it this morning.
Okay. Well, first of all, it goes without saying that, we're not... metaphoric accuracy is, you might say, secondary, but I would like to clarify this because even if birds are hardwired, a lot of them do die without their parents. Some of them, maybe a certain percentage. Otherwise, this maybe urban legend about birds wouldn't be existing. And maybe most of them, can automatically get it on their own, but and there's also the sense of like predators that I said that need their parents to learn how. I might be somehow wrong about that or partially or whatever. It doesn't matter. Pertaining to humans, human beings have lost that natural continuity with their ancestors, their parents, their communities that provide children a teaching or a natural example of referring and encouraging. Not only do adults not encourage and clarify the natural tendency for children to integrate and use their intuition and open up their natural abilities, but they discourage it and they give children guilt trips and they punish children for it. So we have a complete reversal. Parents still teach children, of course, and the society beyond the parents and everybody else, but they teach them the complete opposite, the complete inversion, distortion of what is natural for the most part, and we all have to deal with that. So, even if we were hardwired, which we are hardwired, like the clear perspective of the birds, in order to develop these abilities, we don't just deal with a void of ignorance. We're dealing with a conditioning that's going the complete opposite direction of where our natural hardwiring take us. Imagine having a bird where all the other birds have sticks and they're pounding on it every time it tries to fly. So the analogy in a sense may not be conceptually accurate, but the idea that I want to say is that human beings have the hardwiring, but they have a whole lot of pounding against it. So just say be natural and be yourself and do what, it's like, guys who get the advice, how do I go and talk to women and all of this? Oh, just be yourself. And most nerds will come up and say, well, that's the problem. I am being myself and I'm getting rejected all the time. So, who is this that I'm supposed to be? Be your true self. But who is that? Well, this hardwiring, despite maybe in ancient times when there was a different level of conditioning or things were more natural, or maybe even today when some people have broken through the conditioning, just like the birds without parents can fly, or maybe some tiger without parents can somehow learn to hunt. There's a feedback, and there needs to be that kind of feedback experience. So our natural sense has a reference frame to transcend its conditioning, to start at least to have a handle. And many people think that's too much because, admittedly, the existing forms of understanding have been distorted. There's a lot of people that come off as telling you what to do, and even if they don't, stuck with your own memories of your parents and peers and others doing it to you. So it's not easy. And of course, when you're empathic, if I constantly relate to the fact of how other people feel, I also have to, and anybody, not just me, have to overcome the sense of, oh, this person really is justified for having the resistance. This is how would I deal with it? And it's almost like trying to do the delivery and yet experiencing the challenge of the other person at the same time and integrating those together within the time frame and still coming off as speaking as if, I know what I'm talking about. And this occurs because over time and through the process of integration in yoga, in terms of my own experience, the ego is on my side. The ego doesn't jump the gun, not because it's neglected or whatever, but because it realizes the nature of what's going on. It doesn't have something else talking in its ear, and sometimes when it does and something is brought up, it can step back and learn to relate to it. So everything we've been talking about before is somehow psychological, but most people are conditioned by conventional psychological theories and all of that, and morality, and all of this, and because the psychos have engineered everything, to view any kind of psychological modification as another form of conditioning, or training, or behavioral control. And it's not that at all. It's basically opening lines of communication with the ego, by the ego itself, and opening to the possibilities of everything else. Because, face it, if you take the Christ self, or the center of being, out of the picture, you have the ego, the body, and the life force. And all of these result in the mind and the emotions, the physical body, and all of this. So when these things, the other factors, besides the ego mind, besides the individuality, are the life force and the body dynamic. So grounding into the body dynamic and opening to the life force is the best way to give the ego something else besides its own little locked cage. Feeling grounded into your body, if you feel, they say the best way, and I'm going to mention this further on down because it pertains to the topic at hand. The best way to be in the present moment is to feel your arms and legs. I actually read this online. Somebody was making a lecture on being in the present moment, or being grounded. Just feel your arms and legs, feel the bones in them and all of that. And all of a sudden, where are you? I mean, your body can't relate to anything other than the present moment. And when you relate to your body, there is no ego mind that's separate enough in its own world. It's hardwired to be connected, you know, if your ego is in the brain and all of that, to be connected to the rest of the body. It's a natural thing. So we mentioned last time these 5 subsections of dealing with the ego mind. We mentioned non-violence, which basically for the ego mind is rooted in righteousness. You can, anybody who does a violent act has to justify it to themselves somehow. There is no way that somebody just does a violent act, they won't feel empowered to do it. And usually righteous people are the most driven to violent acts. Then we have truthfulness, and this is basically not telling the truth like you did in school so you won't get punished, but it is authenticity. This is the true be yourself, and it is telling the ego basically, look, man, it's in our best interest to just be, not to lie to ourselves, and so we can conceal things from other people if we see fit, but no need to practice lying because that becomes a habit that ego ends up applying to itself and to the body and to everything else. It thinks it's a survival mechanism, so then it starts using it everywhere, like a little kid would. You know, you say a certain word to a little kid, the little kid starts repeating it everywhere, embarrasses the parent, you know, even though whatever the meaning of the word is. So we need to understand a loving relationship with the personal self in that sense and treat it like a child without being condescending and overbearing and whatever to it. Because it's not it, it's really us. You know, we begin from that perspective of individuality. And the third thing is basically, after authenticity, we go into integrity. All of these things are weaved together. And integrity is basically not, but this is basically respecting other people. It's the golden rule. So I'm upset about that. The problematic thing that I wanted to add some information last time, is what is usually called celibacy. It's not celibacy. The Hindu word is brahmacharya, which basically means the way of the Creator. And essentially, priests originally were representatives of the Creator. So they were supposed to resonate with the Creator. Their words inspired and created new truths or new understandings for people. And the Creator is said to create through the power of the Word, however we may interpret that. So the way of the Creator is basically the way of knowledge, understanding, and wisdom, and eventually learning to apply wisdom through that process. Is being open and receptive to nature as she is, to yourself as you are. It extends from authenticity to integrity to this way of the Creator in order to have the right stance where the ego is stimulated to a sense of purpose. Otherwise, you know, and in the Yoga Sutras and the aphorisms, they say, well, if you follow this path, if you actually orient the ego to the way of the Creator, as being a creator of your own life, not in the New Age sense, but in the sense of actually everything you say and do has impact, being responsible and learning from experience without getting caught up in the sense of making mistakes and all of that, then you acquire virility, vitality, a sense of energy, and a sense of drive, because the ego is, hey, I'm not useless, and I'm not freaked out, and I don't have to protect myself because now I'm actually doing something. I have a sense of purpose. I feel natural. And so the ego more and more, as you go through these things, acquires a sense of relaxation and empowerment. And anybody focusing on these things and contemplating them and just looking where they apply in their lives and how they resonate can slowly open up to this. And the next step is non-attachment. Yes. And what the author says about non-attachment is very interesting, because I mentioned that, okay, this is like a cupped hand where you're not clenching, but you're not apathetic with a limp wrist either. You're basically not receptively cupping the hand in a relaxed fashion, so you're not really attached. I mean, the water that flows isn't held in by anything but gravity when you make it vertical. So the natural flow of reality will keep what you desire with you. Just like the natural flow of gravity will keep the water in your cup calm, because all you have to do is modify its shape a little bit according to your desire. But non-attachment, when you practice it, what it does, in this sense that I'm expressing it, of course, is give you clarity to cause and effect. It gives you a clarity with respect to everything you do in life. You understand the reasons for everything on some level. Confusion basically slowly, the ego isn't as confused as it was before. Now, none of this is a silver bullet. They have all these other things to talk about. But essentially, non-attachment keeps you from dwelling on something unnecessarily because it's already there. You're experiencing it. Extra dwelling doesn't allow you to come into natural contact. It's almost like you're with your lover, and you have this little notebook, and you're taking notes, and you're not being the lover. So non-attachment basically allows space for a relationship with anything in your existential field to become natural. It doesn't mean you reject anything, and it doesn't mean you have to sit around in poverty and isolation, or even celibacy for that matter. All of these are forms of control, and they're misunderstood in my very honest viewpoint and conviction. So as you have these things, and as you move through your sense of natural non-attachment or of natural, you begin to discover an orientation of your ego, of moving through its purpose in life, and maybe asking, is there anything more than this? And so it starts orienting to the center of being. Its defense mechanisms are dropping naturally, so it senses something more. Many of us understand how this feels like. There is something more. I don't care what everybody says about me. I don't care what the scientists or the school teachers say. There is something more because I can feel it. This means that the ego is like Janus. You know, the god Janus has two faces. One faces front, the other faces backward. So the ego can drive the chariot with one face, with one aspect of itself, but it can also look back and multitask and face the higher self, or the center of being. And thus it becomes the conduit, to the rest of the being, even though the higher self is itself situated with a direct connection to the body and the life force on its own terms. So let's get to what I would call the navigation of central proximity. Let's put it this way. It's the way to navigate the relationship with your anointed being, with your anointed self. It's the way to navigate the process of integration and to accelerate it and to know that you are on the right path. These are, again, general principles. They're not dogma. You don't have to follow it to the letter, but it is there to stimulate an understanding. So we have 5 principles. The last 3 are fundamental accelerators and instruments, you might say, or approaches that are directly geared to align with the central being. Now, traditionally, they use the ego things as prohibitions. Don't do this, don't do that, don't do the other. And these other more subtle dynamics of esoteric orientation are do this, do that, do the other. And of course, we're not viewing it that way. A lot of people have been turned off by these aphorisms and such because of these misunderstandings. Now, the first principle, I'm sure everybody's anxious to get to this finally, is known as cleanliness. But I call it psychophysical hygiene. This basically means, it's something that many people feel instinctively. Have you ever taken a bath, but it's not just a physical bath, you feel like you want to cleanse the psychological debris from your body. You want to cleanse the mind while you're taking a bath, you want to cleanse your aura, and all of these things. Have you ever cleaned the house with the same mindset? That you're cleaning the house, you're sweeping it, you're organizing it, but you're also cleaning the energy of the house, you're cleaning the presence and all of the, you mentioned the other day about, going to somebody's house and getting caught up into a drama. Well, when you return to your own house, you obviously felt a sense of wanting to cleanse yourself from that drama. Because it's not denial. In a sense, it's quite the opposite of denial, because you're addressing your own personal field of being, and you're saying, okay, this field of being is distorted and twisted, because dramas are caused by patterns of thought forms and assumptions and directives and subconscious demands and threats and this and that, all kinds of things, all kinds of mental games that influence the emotional body and restrict it or even tap into it to absorb energy, like a kind of vampirism. I mean, a lot of people use dramas as a subconscious tactic to offset other people and throw them in a kind of guilt loop or whatever, so they can actually feel empowered. They actually feel, oh, I wish I was like Ron here, who is confident and at peace and this and that, so I'm going to present my guilt trips and my judgments and all of this. He's going to try to work through them, and while he's doing that, I'm going to, pretend that all his energy is coming to me, and it actually works. And a lot of people do that, a lot more people than we might imagine. A lot of people cause confusion and disruptions. A lot of them are trolls, for example, in order to feel a sense of empowerment. This is kind of an energy drain. It's more than just, and psychological dumping. These tactics exist in the same way that viruses exist in our environment. So psychophysical hygiene recognizes this without becoming hypochondriacal, without becoming a psychic hypochondriac. You don't go around and say, oh, everybody's out to get me, or everybody's dirty, or everybody's impure. You're basically aware that, okay, this is an environment. I can see children go around getting dirty and not getting sick all the time if they're healthy. So it's important to basically look to your own physical hygiene, to the physical hygiene of your environment, without being a neat freak or using, the artificial cleanser chemical thing, either on yourself or elsewhere. But psychically, this is a sense of cleaning your aura without rejecting anything. Anyways, this is something that I'm going into topics that it's very difficult to sum up in very few words, because there are whole doctrines about this. There's whole understandings, whole teachings for each one, whole traditions all over the globe. But I believe people can get my point if they just think of their natural instinct. You get in your car and you talk to your car, and you talk to it in order for it to work better for you. That's a form of psychophysical hygiene, because you're cleansing the debris that keeps the car from working at that level. You're doing an energy circulation of the car. And your gratitude and your appreciation of the car when you talk to it is basically like clean water that washes through it, and the car looks to you and says, thank you for doing that. Your love and appreciation have actually given me a perspective of health, of wholeness. And so health and wholeness is also cleanliness. Cleanliness is godliness, as our, religious parents might be saying and stuff. But there is some truth to this. So psychophysical hygiene might require a little bit of contemplation, but I believe I got the point across. It helps you in your relationships. It is not paranoid every time you go and shake somebody's hand or relate to somebody to wash your hands with natural soap, or even just running water, but with the intention to say, okay, whatever I need to learn for myself, I accept that. Whatever I am, I accept that. But other people's dramas, I just don't have room for them. That is their way of trying to deal with things and not my own. And even that kind of condescending thing is just, I'd like to purify it. And that can make a difference if it becomes a habit. Now, the next thing is something, again, it's almost a cliche. It's living in the moment. And living in the moment is something we've all heard about. And the best way to live in the moment is just to sit back, take a few deep breaths, and feel your body. Be your body. Who is the one behind the eyes, but not just behind the eyes, but down the throat, into the heart, down the gut, all the way down through the legs and out the arms. There are sensations of being that connect the mind, the brain, persona, whatever, through all of the little brains that are around our spinal axis and all throughout the body. And this connects with the life force. So being present in the body, you can notice that all of a sudden you're not thinking as much. In fact, you might notice that you are thinking to the degree that you're not present in the body. You may be partially present, and thoughts basically, in order to think, you have to go into some kind of virtual reality. This isn't bad because our forebrains, from what I've read and what videos I've seen, are basically inhibitors that keep us in a kind of virtual reality so we can step back, and so we can think about things, and so we can plan, and so we can correlate, and all of these things. So we don't respond in some kind of knee-jerk instinctive reaction, but there's no reason for it to be either or. You can be in your own sense of thought when it's not a running program or something unhygienic. There is such thing as unhygienic thinking. We don't have to think in terms of good and bad or moral and immoral. Think in terms of hygienic and unhygienic. And then your whole worldview changes because you're just looking out for your health. It's not like you're being selfish. Being healthy is not being selfish. Eating right is not being selfish. A lot of people might give others guilt trips. Oh, you're just concerned about your exercising because you're selfish, you're vain. You want to look good. Yes, I want to look good because that's a reflection of how I feel and my whole vitality and everything. Oh, that's bullshit. Throw it out the window. And the ego is going to thank you for it because it's going to say, look, man, I know I've had my problems, but I've been right on this little thing. And it's very important to the ego to know that it's been right about something. I mean, it's not some complete loser here like many people have painted it. And as it does this, it learns to trust the sense that, okay, this center of being guy, this anointed thing, is not going to damn me like the religions say. You know, he's not going to throw me into hell because I'm unworthy. And so there are natural resources in the ego when this happens. And when you are in the present moment, your anxiety decreases. Anybody can find that. If you're in the present moment and it's very hard to worry about the future because you're too busy experiencing a very, very the fullness of that moment. You don't have to be like that all the time to for health and all of that. But it's also far healthier to remember the past and learn from it, which isn't dwelling, it's basically learning, than it is to constantly project into what the future is going to be. And we've all heard this before. But there is an analogy I've heard from some people who are friends of mine on the internet that basically, why don't you treat it like driving backwards? You know, you're driving a bus, but your chair is facing the front window. So you're basically looking out the back window and you can actually see where you've been and you experience where you are, and you don't need to experience where you're going to go because that doesn't exist. It's not a predetermined terrain. If you think the future is a predetermined terrain like a real road that you have to navigate because you're going to fall off the cliff, then that's fate. Then you're saying everything, your script is all written. But if your future is open-ended, then what matters is everything you've learned so far and where you are and how everything you've learned so far affects where you are. Then you can make decisions of where your best course is. You don't have to throw the future out there and make it real before you enter into it. There's no need for that. Reality is in the present moment, and the present moment recreates itself continuously to give a certain illusion that there is a future. It's really the ongoing dynamic of the present moment. But the point is, that's getting a little too far at this point. Right now, the whole idea is to alleviate the extra baggage of excessive planning, of dwelling on the future. Just feel your body and be in the sense, make a habit of it, and you might find a sense of natural joy. That's what the Yoga Sutras say, basically, that you actually discover a sense of natural joy that you didn't have before.
And then this orients the ego even closer to the higher self, because that natural joy actually comes from the higher self that is always in the present moment. And it's a connection even though unrecognized. Now we come to the three phases, and I'll try to accelerate this even though they're very, very deep dynamics, but they are simple at the same time. These three are expediters of the process, and the author even says that, look, the actual action potential of connecting with your higher self, you can actually, isolate it to these three parts in principle. But, they connect with everything else, and they are part of a greater process. And the more you express in the process, the more detail you get, in a sense, without getting too much detail, the better chance you have of resonating your own feelings out of vagueness and into some kind of concrete dynamic of understanding. In any case, the clearer the map, the more easy it is to navigate the territory. So, the first of these is called heat, and it is translated as austerity. And so they tell us basically that in order to progress, we have to do austerities. And austerities are basically, you hear it with bankers all the time too. Basically, it means deprivation. It means suffering. It means grabbing a whip and hitting yourself. It means starving. It means, all of these things. But this is obviously what the priests and the philosophers of the priests are saying. In reality, heat just means heat. It means, in the metaphoric sense, passion. It means commitment. It means drive. It means you're ignited. You're like, oh, what do we say when we really want to do something? I'm all fired up about this. So that's what this means. It means if you want the ego to move even more smoothly, you find within yourself a sense, and not forcing it either, but you actually slowly, as this process continues, it begins igniting your inner passion, what they call a spiritual passion, or a passion toward integration. You recognize the meaning and value of it. It's not some pipe dream. There's something to it. And that's why it's important to affirm all of these things, to recognize them. When you're in a love relationship, and this integration thing is a lot like a love relationship, with all the parts of being and everything. You want to basically affirm your love to the other person without making it cheap. You want to affirm it in moments when it's meaningful to affirm. You want to say, yes, I love you, or you want to say, yes, I appreciate you, and yes, I'm grateful for you. And you want to do it in a way that the other person gets as being sincere, because it is that way. Even in the moments of, like waking up in the morning, or where it's least expected, or the moments where it's most expected, but not so much that it becomes, we get the drift, basically. Inner passion is the essential for accomplishment and for developing abilities. The more your inner passion, and sometimes you're going to feel all these resistances, but you can feel the resistances and still feel that passion. It's always there. Anything that actually, if you feel resonant with these words, or if you feel resonant with esoteric meaning, or that there's something more, that's inner passion. It's there. It may be a spark, it may be a little tiny match flame, but the point is that it can be fanned and it can be encouraged. And the ego is actually the way to do this. The ego is the one that can say, that's nothing, or let's douse this, or it's a threat. But the ego can also say, wow, man, so far I've gotten all of these, I'm actually appreciated, and I'm liberated, and I feel more of the life force in me, and I feel more grounded in the chariot, and the chariot's going better. All of these things. Let yourself fuel your inner passion. And anybody who tries to douse your inner passion, just, say, Next, exactly, yeah. It's okay, dude. Next time. So from the inner passion, you move to another thing that many spiritual teachers have expressed, and yet I find it in some sense can be very much misunderstood. It's known as self-study, or self-observation, or observation, but people usually, they'll either say, detach, they go back to the principle of detachment and say, okay, just stand back and from the corner of the room and view yourself in the other corner and don't feel anything. Real observation means proximity. It actually means participation from a perspective that encompasses all angles. It is meta participation. It's a greater perspective of participation. It doesn't mean separation. The last thing we need is separation from ourselves. So observation is the recognition of the experience we are having at any given moment. It is an acknowledgement and an attention toward that experience. It is a direct affirmation of everything you're experiencing on its own merit, so to speak. It is not the affirmation of whether it's valuable or this or that or what quality it has, but the affirmation of the experience, how it feels, how it is, what impact it's having on you, and all of this. Eyes open, it's lucidity. But self-study also means paying attention to the details, to the relationships of everything. And that includes your own feelings. And it also leads to a recognition. The author basically says, well, this is going to bring you into proximity with your higher self, because you're going to start noticing your higher self blipping like a lighthouse turns, so then it's in the dark most of the time, but then you see the blaring light, in front of your face, and it's almost blinding, and then it goes off and you can see the beam a little bit, and when it goes in the back, it disappears. The shadow of the lighthouse occults it. Or like the sun going around the earth. There's nighttime, there's daytime. See, in the natural course of events, if we're observant, we can discern through the workings of our own ego, body, and life force, the higher self influence coming in and out into our lives. And you've seen this before, you've experienced it. Sometimes you feel that peace, sometimes you feel the guidance, sometimes it's completely gone. Sometimes things are blown into confusion. And you can even notice that it's almost cyclic in a way, that it's almost like, oh, this is a midnight where the higher self is concerned with the deeper self, and oh, it's high noon now. There it is. I'm actually getting sunburned. It's a little too much, or there's a beautiful sunrise of the higher self. So there is a natural sense of recognition. And somebody might say, how? Well, how do we, well, that's what I'm saying. This is hardwired into us. This is where I agree with those people that say, well, we need to be natural and not be too much methodology oriented, whatever. In some cases, yes. In some cases, methodology might help a little more. And it all depends on the person. We can't, the one thing we need not be is lazy about it, which doesn't mean a kind of weird work ethic, but it means inner passion. It means recognizing the passion and the drive that we've gotten, not just from the non-attachment before, but that identification with the creator path, the learning, the joy, the child that is open to the whole world and experiences it not as a stupid game, but as a joyful activity of play. Children don't even distinguish between work and play until adults make them do that. It's not that they consider everything a game in terms of how adult considers it. They just consider life fun. Life is enjoyable. Life is meant to provide a learning experience, and experience is fulfilling all the time. Little kids stick things in their mouth even if they taste bad, and they laugh about it. How many times do we do something like that? But trauma is a whole other story, because trauma is not just lovelessness, but it goes into the reversal of our nature that tears us apart, or it focuses on things already torn apart and pours salt on the wounds. So self-study is going to put the ego in a position of midnight and high noon and sunrise and sunset, and the ego is going to find out that, okay, now I need to go back to the inner passion and stoke the fires a bit, because the day has both night and sunrise and sunset. I'm going to feel the higher self increase its presence. I'm going to feel it maximize its presence. I'm going to feel it decrease its presence. But through the identification and the understanding and the recognition of the cycle itself, and it doesn't have to be like it in terms of temporal cycle and all of that, just a sense of rhythm. Through that natural rhythm, we can basically identify where and how the higher self is non-intellectually, and learn to sense its presence and come closer to it. Now, how do we come closer to it? That's the fifth way. So number 5, basically, number 4 will bring us into a spiral where we do gravitate toward it. But number 5 brings us into coherence with it, brings us into alignment in the sense of it resonates with us, and we come into a point of contact. And then we start having our mystical experiences. So number 5 is the beginning of mystical experience, but it's not going to be, life-altering, most likely. It might be. But it's not most likely going to be shake your world too much. It might be very humble, it might be gentle, and for the most part, it's occurring all the time. even under the distress dynamics of our lives. But, the ego now is not being trained, it's being untrained to discover its natural sense of orienting to the center of being, to the anointed aspect of its being. And so the final aspect of this 5 subsection dynamic of internal or esoteric navigation, the navigation of the ego or personality or individual self toward the center of being or the anointed self, is essentially surrender to the higher self. And the word surrender, I never liked it. It really, it's not that far different in my mind from being a victim. So most people translate it as surrender, but I view it as basically open receptivity, trust. Finally, the ego is realizing that this is a beneficial thing for me. I'm the individual, the body feels really good, better to me, and we're coming into a coherence of identity. The life force is flowing. I'm more comfortable with my sexuality. Nobody's told me I have to be celibate and I have to go feel guilty about things. I'm authentic and I don't feel bad about it. People are responding positively to it because I'm doing it in a mature manner. I'm learning maturity. The ego is now growing up without having to be forced to grow up and without having to be obligated to grow up. Obligation is really nasty for the ego. We talk about duty and this and that or the other. Hey man, you can convince somebody to do something without that. Just where your best interests are and their best interests are, come together on those points. There's no need to invoke duty or obligation or anything. It's a natural agreement. You're on the same page. In any case, the ego learns to orient in that manner, and a natural repercussion is that it trusts the higher self. I mean, we all, spiritual people, one thing they might realize along the way is that, and I've noticed this in others and in myself, is that, we call it the higher self, the God self, the Christ self, but there's a part of us that doesn't trust it. There's a part of us in there that's still pissed off at it. Why the hell are you over there and I'm over here? Why are you letting me suffer? And you betrayed me. There are all kinds of things that are in there. And there's no reason to feel bad about them. You don't blame the child because it's been beaten. Whatever those others say, we've drawn this on ourselves. No, the only time you are justified in saying to you or for anybody else that they've caused, they've drawn something onto their heads or caused it, is when they're integrated. Because, if somebody is identifying with a fragment over here and the causality comes from a fragment over there, you can't pin everything on the fragment over here. When all the fragments come together, then you have the realization of how and why and where it all fits together and what you can do about it. You don't blame a child for adult things. You don't blame a child for being molested, It's still, when the child becomes an adult, there's an esoteric perspective that their adult self becomes a molester, or their adult self harbors hatred. And somehow the energy of that probable self influences the child, and so you have a kind of, because there's a trauma in there, there's a trauma between the adult and the child self that goes even beyond the events of the current lifetime. And so as the child grows up, it's going to encounter that crazy storm of possibility where it's being attacked. And then it passes through that storm and it enters into being a traumatized adult that actually harms other people and has them hating them and all of this. So things are more complex in that manner. And it's very hard. I'm not trying to make sense of this specific thing right now, but I'm saying that the very reason I'm promoting all of these things is to help people who are receptive to come to a place where they can make sense of all these things, where they can make sense of the questions and gain answers. And when they gain answers, these are answers of wisdom that can lead to application capacity. And so abilities are not just dodging bullets and being psychic and all of these. It's gaining the stance, as I've said before, the health, the state of being where all of these things come naturally, or where you're able to move for them to come naturally. So as you trust the higher self, you realize that really, and this is again, a heads up to all those people that say you have to just be natural and nothing. This is where being natural actually, at this point, if you do this completely, you can actually get to the point of your higher self guidance awakens, and then you don't need anybody else telling you anything. You don't have to clarify anything. But essentially, even at that point, the rest of yoga is actually a continuation of this fifth stage. It's a continuation of being receptive and open to the higher self and integrating it with all the other parts of self. Now, we have about 5 more parts and then the summation. And I'm going to try to be as concise as I can, but if there's going to be detail, I'll try to elaborate on that. The other parts basically are your psychophysical stance, basically grounding. Then we talk about energy, sensory internalization, what that means. And then we go to the final 3, which are concentration, meditation, and enlightenment, as they usually call it. And I'll just leave it at that. Once you attain these things, then you have the capacity to actually turn in and say, okay, let's turn on the switches of the abilities. And the Yoga Sutras give you how to do that. I believe I probably went over time again, and I apologize.
Over 45, it's 46, 47 minutes.
Oh my God. Okay.
I'm going to take some off at the beginning.
Okay, so it should be 42. Again, I'm doing the best I can, and I apologize if I've tired out my audience. But this will continue.
I'll see you on Friday, Aristo. Thank you very much. Namaste.
Thank you for bearing with me.
Okay. Bye-bye for now.
Bye-bye.